con este tema de Piazzolla, Adiós Nonino, que le dedicamos a nuestro amigo y colega Marcelo Cruz.
This is Ian McFarland in British Columbia on Canada's west coast. And this is WRMI, Radio Miami International, Okeechobee, Florida, USA. You can also hear us on the internet at www.wrmi.net. Send us your program comments and reception reports to info@wrmi.net or to WRMI, P.O. Box 526852, Miami, Florida 33152, USA.
Hello, this is Freedom Synergy Radio from WRMI, Okeechobee, Florida, USA. If you'd like a QSL card from Freedom Synergy Radio, just send us a reception report mentioning the day, time, and frequency you are listening to, which is 5,800 kilohertz. Send your report to radiomiami9@gmail.com. That's radiomiami9@gmail.com.
New U.S. legislation aims to counter communist China. The bill will confront nearly all of Beijing's aggressive behavior. The White House says its upcoming renewable energy programs will create new U.S. jobs. But it seems the plan could make more jobs in China instead, and they could involve forced labor. The Philippines is invoking an old treaty with the U.S. It says an assault on Filipino territory is the same as an assault on U.S. territory. That's South Korea boosts the cost of hosting U.S. troops there. All of the new actions target Beijing's aggression in the South China Sea. A report says an enraged homeowner killed a high-profile gang member in China. That's after authorities asked a group of thugs to forcibly tear down local houses. Now authorities are covering up the incident. And a heartbreaking story follows a 13-year-old girl as she fights for justice. Police and even her parents failed to help her after a violent kidnapping and assault. So she's turning to social media to get her message out. Hello and welcome to China in Focus. I'm Evelyn Lee, filling in for Tiffany today. The U.S. is introducing sweeping new legislation to counter communist China. The bill will confront nearly all of Beijing's controversial behavior. Nearly 300 pages, the bill will address China's abuse of the Uyghur ethnic minority, its crackdown on Hong Kong's democracy, its aggression toward Taiwan, and its assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. On the Uyghur issue, new sanctions are possible. For Hong Kong, the bill will show further support for the city's democracy. Toward Taiwan, the legislation calls for an enhanced diplomatic partnership. And the Indo-Pacific region, the bill will focus on furthering U.S. military development there. In a news briefing on Friday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said China resolutely opposes the bill, but Taiwan's foreign ministry voiced the opposite. The spokeswoman expressed appreciation for the U.S. Senate's show of support. The draft measure is titled the Strategic Competition Act of 2021. It was introduced by leaders of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez and Jim Risch. Menendez said he's confident the bill will be overwhelmingly approved by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee next week and the full Senate shortly thereafter. The committee will meet on April 14th to vote on the bill. The odds are looking slim for a U.S. snub of the Beijing Olympics. On Wednesday, the White House said there is no conversation of a boycott of the Games. The White House press secretary has noted that the U.S. position on a boycott has not changed. She told reporters that the administration has not discussed and are not discussing any joint boycott with allies and partners. The comment followed a warning from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Speaking about a potential boycott, the spokesman said that an attack on China would be met with a forceful response and opposition. Growing calls for a boycott of the Games come in light of China's poor human rights records. And the spotlight is Beijing's abuse against Uyghur Muslim minorities. Allegations say over 1 million Uyghurs have been forcibly detained in China's Xinjiang region. Abuses reportedly include torture, forced sterilization, political brainwashing, forced labor, and sometimes forced organ harvesting. The Biden administration claims that new good-paying jobs will be created for the renewable energy programs in their new infrastructure plan. However, it seems more jobs may be created in China instead, and it may involve forced labor in Xinjiang.
President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan pushes for a green energy economy. Officials say it could create well-paid jobs, especially for displaced fossil fuel workers.
We want to make sure that we create good-paying jobs for all kinds of people in every pocket of America, and that means good-paying union jobs.
However, the president of the think tank Heartland Institute, James Taylor, says the move to a green economy would shift jobs from American conventional energy to foreign wind and solar power.
The rare earth minerals and other important minerals and metals that are necessary for wind turbines and solar panels, they are produced primarily outside the United States and primarily in China.
Rare earths and polysilicon are two raw materials needed for green energy technologies, and China dominates both markets. Moreover, nearly half of the world's polysilicon, which is crucial to producing solar cells, comes from Xinjiang, an area notorious for its forced labor camps.
Not just the materials, but the wind turbines and solar panels also are produced primarily outside the United States and primarily in China.
Recently, both Republicans and Democrat lawmakers have urged the solar industries to keep China, especially Xinjiang, out of their supply chain. However, Taylor says that might not be possible in the near future due to the high pollution levels of producing these materials and low labor costs in China. Biden's Environmental Protection Agency administrator also said recently that most of the parts the U.S. wants to install come from China.
To get Chinese ships out of its waters, the Philippines is invoking a 70-year-old treaty it has with the U.S. The treaty says an assault on Filipino territory is the same as an assault on U.S. territory. NTD's WRMI has more.
The Philippines is again warning Beijing to tone down its aggression in the South China Sea. That's because China has still yet to remove ships it sent into the Filipino waters. In a fresh warning to expedite their departure, the Philippines is threatening a potential U.S. involvement in the standoff. The Philippines Defense Department says the country is keeping its options open. That includes leveraging partnerships with other nations, such as the United States. The department added that both parties are committed to undertaking their obligations under the Mutual Defense Treaty. The Mutual Defense Treaty is a 70-year-old pact between the Philippines and the United States. Under it, the U.S. is obligated to aid the Philippines in resisting threats or attacks. It also says that an assault on one party's territory is the same as assaulting on both the U.S. and Filipino territory. The Trump administration and the Biden administration have both affirmed that the pact applies to disputes in the South China Sea.
As we have stated before, an armed attack against the Philippines armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft in the Pacific, including in the South China Sea, will trigger our obligations under the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. When it comes to this...
In recent weeks, China has sailed over 250 ships into the Whitsun Reef area in the South China Sea. This despite a 2016 arbitral tribunal ruling that the reef is within the Philippines' territory. The Filipino side has said that it will protest every day until the Chinese vessels are removed. The U.S. says it stands behind the ruling, and the Filipino side amid the dispute.
We have reiterated our strong support for the Philippines, and we have called on the PRC to abide by the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal award under the law of the Sea Convention, which is final and legally binding on all parties.
The Philippines is a very important strategic ally. U.S. strategists see the country as a crucial link that could enable American forces to deter or win a conflict against Beijing. Balun, NTD News.
South Korea signed a defense cost-sharing agreement with the U.S. on Thursday. This amid rising tensions between Beijing and its neighbors in the region. In the agreement, South Korea promised to increase this year's cost of hosting U.S. troops in the country by about 13%. This is the biggest rise, which may stagger a lot of people. But not as many are aware that the infiltration actually started decades ago. NTD's Becky Joe takes a closer look at what's been happening behind the scenes in Canada.
The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP's influence operations in America's next-door neighbor and ally Canada reach into many aspects of society, including the media, the military, and the cultural sphere. First, we look at the media. According to a Canadian reporter, Chinese state-owned news agency Xinhua asked him to spy on people under the guise of news reporting. All intelligence he collected went to Beijing. Mark Burry used to work for Xinhua as its Ottawa correspondent a decade ago. He told the Epoch Times that the agency repeatedly asked him to collect intelligence. When then CCP leader Hu Jintao visited Canada in 2010, Xinhua asked Burry to find out who protested the visit and where those people stayed. Burry thought this was part of his news report, but it was never published. When the Dalai Lama visited Canada in 2012, Xinhua asked Burry to find out what the spiritual leader said to Canada's then Prime Minister in private. When Burry realized his reports weren't published, he confronted his boss. Xinhua's reply was that it always avoids publishing pieces that would embarrass the CCP, and that all his reports went straight to Beijing as intelligence. Refusing to spy on people, Burry quit after working for 2 years. The Canadian government website says Xinhua has an office in Ottawa. The agency was established in Canada almost 2 decades ago. Now we look at the military. The Chinese regime's military underwent winter training in Canada in 2018. The Canadian Prime Minister's spokesman admitted that Canada trained a Chinese military delegation in Ontario. Documents obtained by Rebel News show Canada conducted 18 military projects with Beijing in 2019. Canada's top military officer decided to cancel military exercises with Chinese troops in 2019. It was by request of the U.S. military, but the Canadian Foreign Affairs Department objected to the decision. They claimed that Beijing might see this as a retaliatory move related to the Meng Wanzhou case. In 2018, Canada arrested Chinese telecom giant Huawei's chief financial officer Wang Wanzhou upon U.S. request. Canada then canceled the training following the backlash.
This is one of the reasons why we actually stopped our training with the Chinese, Mr. Speaker, and this is exactly what we're doing.
Now we turn to the cultural sphere. Many Beijing-controlled Confucius Institutes, or CIs, are still operating on Canadian campuses. A former teacher at a CI near Toronto explains what those institutes teach.
In fact, although the Confucius Institutes are outside China, they have strict requirements for our thoughts. It may sound old-fashioned, they do require that you follow the party line. That's how it is in the Confucius Institute.
Zhao told the Epoch Times that CI instructors must teach what the CCP wants people to know, such as Tibet has been so-called liberated by the regime and that Taiwan is part of communist China. They have to avoid topics such as the Tiananmen massacre in classrooms. These requirements went against Zhao's values, so she quit after teaching there for a year. Zhao then sued CI for its discriminatory hiring process. Before working at CI, Zhao had to sign a contract promising not to practice Falun Gong. Falun Gong is a meditation practice in the Buddhist tradition. It consists of moral teachings based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, and 5 exercises. Zhao kept her faith to herself due to the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China, but she resumed her spiritual journey after meeting up with some practitioners in Canada. Canada's McMaster University closed its CI in 2013 after its parent agency failed to remove its discriminatory requirements. A CCP agency affiliated with the United Fruit Work Department provides funding for CIs around the world. Becky Zhou, NTD News.
And coming up, an outraged Chinese resident reportedly kills a leading gang member. That's after local authorities asked the thugs to forcibly demolish nearby residents' homes. Now authorities seem to be covering up the incident. More on that after the break. Again denying human rights abuses in the Xinjiang region following recent backlash. On Friday, CCP officials tried to discredit criticisms by airing propaganda videos for journalists at a press conference in Beijing. UN experts say at least 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in camps in Xinjiang. Witnesses say the communist regime tortured and sterilized Uyghurs and other dissidents. Last month, the US, the EU, the UK, and Canada imposed sanctions on Chinese officials over human rights abuses in Xinjiang. A man has gone missing in southern China. His son is appealing for help after local police harassed the man's wife. But his disappearance is only part of the story. His family has been persecuted by the Chinese Communist regime for 2 decades, all because they refused to give up their faith. NTD's Chang Chun has more.
Zhao Fenghui disappeared in southern China's Sanya City in Hainan province on Wednesday. He practices Falun Gong, a spiritual meditation system that has been brutally persecuted in China since 1999. The man's son, Zhao Shuai, explained his father had started heading home in the afternoon. But by that evening, he still hadn't arrived. No one could reach him. A family friend then called the police and confirmed that one person had been arrested and detained that day. But officers wouldn't release the person's name. Shuai suspected it was his father. That same evening, a group of police officers went to Shuai's parents' home. They ordered his mother to open the door, but didn't mention his father's whereabouts.
The police came to my parents' door and kept harassing us. My mother stayed quiet inside. She didn't dare to open the door because there were too many police officers. The camera on the door captured 6 people.
Shuai's father worked as a project supervisor for a major Chinese bank. He was expelled from his work unit and sent to work in a forced labor camp twice because of his belief. All 3 members of the family practice Falun Gong.
Since the persecution of Falun Gong started in 1999, my father has been petitioning authorities. He's been detained several times for a total of nearly 5 years. My father went on hunger strike 3 times, each time for more than 20 days. He went on a hunger strike, then was arrested, and then went on a hunger strike again.
Shuai's father was first arrested in 2000 for holding protesting banners in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Authorities then transferred him to the detention center in his hometown in northeastern China. There, police instructed other inmates to beat him and tied his feet to a 3-foot-long stick. The stick was left on for a full week, even while eating and sleeping. Once it was removed, he could no longer walk. The man was later sent to a forced labor camp, an effort to force him to give up Falun Gong. The police beat him until he lost consciousness. He and other Falun Gong practitioners were also forced to watch videos slandering Falun Gong. That's in addition to performing forced labor. In 2002, Shuai's father was detained in a labor camp for the 2nd time. He went on a hunger strike while there. Because of it, he went from over 200 pounds to just 90. By the time he was released, he couldn't even walk by himself. In light of the persecution, the family was forced to move to southern China in 2005. But the police continued chasing them from the northeast to the south. Last year, Shuai finally settled in Europe. According to U.S.-based Falun Gong news website Minhui.org, in the past year alone, over 100 Falun Gong practitioners have died because of the persecution. Shuai continues to appeal to the international community, asking the world to pay attention to what's happening to his family and rescue his father.
I just want them to release my father immediately and stop harassing my mother. At the same time, I also condemn this torture used by the Chinese Communist Party against us Falun Dafa practitioners.
Shuai's mother has since escaped and fled her home, but there's no information about Shuai's father's whereabouts. Chang Chun, NTD News.
When CCP officials asked some gang members to forcibly demolish homes in a Chinese village, an outraged resident reportedly killed the leading gang member. But local authorities are believed to be covering up the incident.
Local officials in a northern Chinese city is believed to have hired gang members to demolish residents' homes. A homeowner at the scene, however, drove a truck into the leading gang member and crushed him to death. Some Chinese netizens hailed the homeowner as a hero, saying a hero has reappeared. Local media covered the incident on Wednesday, but the report soon got blocked. An insider said online that the incident happened in late March. According to local residents, a group of people came to their village to demolish houses. They were dressed in uniforms and armed with riot gear. The group was reportedly led by a gang member called Yang Jinzhou. When Yang got to local resident Mr. Xie's home, he did not find Xie there. Yang reportedly beat Xie's 70-year-old parents. Other villagers went to find Xie and he hurried home. Yang then reportedly cursed at Xie. Xie was then agitated and drove a heavy truck into Yang and knocked him to death. Later, local officials reportedly tried to cover up the forced demolition and treated the incident as a traffic accident. Xie is currently held in the local detention center.
And now we turn to news of a 13-year-old girl and how she's being forced to seek justice for herself through social media. That's after authorities and even her family failed to help her. A victim of kidnapping and rape, authorities have refused to step in. When she went to the police, they brushed her off, claiming nearby surveillance tools were broken. The lack of help pushed her to share her story online. The young girl's name is Anne. Attached to her post is a video fully exposing her face. She's also holding a signboard with her name, ID, home address, and phone number written on it. Anne explained that after she was attacked, thugs sent by the rapist showed up at her home. They threatened the lives of her and her family, warning them not to go to the police. To back up the threat, they claimed to have connections with the police. They also offered the girl's parents money to settle the situation, but Anne refused. She explained that her parents became angry out of fear and beat her a number of times to get her to accept the offer. She ended her video by saying, "I beg you to share this and help me." In a later post, Anne said police tried to arrest her on Friday in the name of an investigation. But she suspects the police just wanted to control and silence her. As the influence of Anne's post continues to grow, the town's local police published announcements about the case on Thursday. They urged people not to circulate Anne's video. They likened stopping the video's reach to holding hands in order to protect the healthy growth of children. The next day, a second notice was released, saying the victim had been properly settled and care measures have been implemented. Yet another incident that same day suggests otherwise. A fan of a Chinese internet celebrity who saw Anne's video went to Anne's village to investigate. But when they arrived, the fan was surrounded and attacked by 4 men and 2 women at the entrance of the village. The attackers grabbed the person's smartphones, deleted photos of the incident, and drove the person out of the village. The fan later started receiving harassment phone calls. Taiwan's foreign minister is accusing Beijing of using its vaccine diplomacy to flex its muscles. The comment came on Wednesday as Taiwan allies step up counter-pressure on China. The Chinese regime has made its intentions clear to South American countries, saying Beijing will offer them vaccine supplies as long as they break up diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Beijing's pressure is particularly heavy on Central South America, where Taiwan has 5 allies. According to Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu, the Chinese regime actively promotes itself in Paraguay, promising the country millions of doses under condition that it departs from Taiwan relations. The situation has heaped pressure on Taiwan to establish diplomatic ties with Paraguay back in 1957. Wu says countries that accept Chinese vaccines all exert influence over Taiwan's diplomatic allies. Taiwan has since been actively building connections with like-minded countries, including Japan, the U.S., and India. India has already sent 100,000 vaccine doses to Paraguay, and another 100,000 doses are on the way. Wu added that currently India's help is the most important. While U.S. goodwill can help relieve China's pressure on many countries, Beijing denies using vaccine diplomacy tactics in its dealings with Paraguay. The Italian Prime Minister is revealing that his government blocked a Chinese takeover of an Italian semiconductor manufacturer. He says the Italian government could potentially block more such takeovers. Bloomberg reports that the Italian company is LPE Designs. It makes a product that treats silicon and readies it for chip manufacturing. The Prime Minister says it was common sense to prevent the semiconductor takeover, seeing how a chip shortage has slowed auto production. Italy's Golden Powers rule allows its leaders to protect strategic businesses. Italy's economic development minister wants Italy's steel and automotive sectors to fall under the same protections. The pandemic and the resulting economic losses have left some companies vulnerable to takeovers. The EU as a whole has beefed up protections for those companies. Twitter is launching a new emoji to celebrate the first anniversary of Asia's pro-democracy movement, Milk Tea Alliance. The movement's name comes from a popular drink in the region, milk tea. The online alliance first started last April as a Twitter meme. By now, it has grown into a global movement led by human rights activists in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Thailand. Twitter says over 11 million tweets over the past year featured the Milk Tea Alliance hashtag. The alliance criticizes the Chinese regime's aggressions in the South China Sea, among other issues. Twitter is banned in China, but not in Hong Kong. Last year, Hong Kong's pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong posted on Twitter saying, "Hong Kong stands with our freedom-loving friends in Thailand against Chinese bullying." Twitter is asking people around the world to join the conversation to show support for the movement. And that is it for today's China in Focus. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Evelyn Lee.
Which of these two maps is correct? Depends on who you ask. Most countries don't recognize China's territorial claim, but China is trying to change that by slowly changing the maps you see around the world. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by MOVA Globes. This is the coolest globe you'll ever own. But there's one thing that most people buying it won't notice, but China Uncensored viewers will. Some of you already have. It turns out there's no single standard map of the world, at least not from the perspective of the roughly 200 countries in the world. Not every country agrees on where the borders are. For example, India has border disputes with both Pakistan and China. So each of those countries has its own version of the world map. And most notably, the People's Republic of China thinks they own the entire South China Sea. That's why, on China's official maps, they draw this 9-dash line. Everything inside belongs to China, including the entire country of Taiwan, which is also claimed by the People's Republic of China. Plus, China's map claims this entire chunk of India's Arunachal Pradesh state. China calls it South Tibet. The important thing here is that while this is China's current official map, pretty much no other country's government agrees. In fact, in 2016, an international tribunal in The Hague rejected China's claims to the South China Sea. That made it official, except that China rejected The Hague's ruling and then ramped up its own plans to quietly change the rest of the world's maps. That's why when you look at a map printed in China, it looks like this. Here's a close-up. As you can see, this globe has the 9-dash line, and Taiwan is in the same color as mainland China. So wait, why is China Uncensored sponsored by a company that prints China's version of the map on its globes? Turns out, it's a crazy story. It all started a few months ago. Shelley, Matt, and I were at a museum in Norway, and we saw these MOVA globes in the gift shop. I thought, cool, that's our sponsor. And then I looked more closely. On each globe, I could see China's 9-dash line. I was surprised because this is the globe MOVA had sent us before when they sponsored America Uncovered. It does not have the 9-dash line. Some of our viewers also contacted us and said they noticed the 9-dash line on their own MOVA globes. So we emailed MOVA and asked them what was going on. And they told us their fascinating story of Chinese censorship and crippling fines. MOVA International is an American company based in San Diego. But their globes use a lot of complicated high-tech parts that are not available in the U.S. So, and this may sound familiar, they set up shop in China by contracting with a local factory. That way, it was easier and cheaper to get the parts they needed. They began making globes in China in 2008. By 2017, MOVA was doing more than 80% of its manufacturing in China. MOVA makes dozens of designs, including Earth globes, the Moon, other planets, even a Van Gogh painting. MOVA is always focused on the technology of their globes. They're not an educational company, so they are never concerned with the politics of maps. MOVA purchased their map designs from a Chinese vendor and then had a local company do the physical printing. That includes their 12 globe designs that have political maps of the world. And it turns out, Chinese government regulations require that all maps sold in China or printed in China but sold abroad have to have China's official version of the world map. And since MOVA had its maps printed in China, it had no choice but to comply with Chinese law. Over the years, and especially since the 2016 Hague ruling, the Chinese government has strengthened its map printing rules. As my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, put it, the goal is to make the Chinese government's position on territory clear to the international community. And this is important because problematic maps will confuse the international community about China's territory and the government's position, or even be hyped up by those with ulterior motives, seriously damaging national interests and the government's image. And while most normal people would consider this to be ludicrous, the People's Republic of China takes it very, very seriously. And they literally have inspectors check every single Chinese factory, including foreign companies, to make sure their maps are politically correct. Here's another example. Shelley got this map as a Christmas gift. You can scratch off the countries you've been to. It's sold by a UK-based company. It, too, has China's 9-dash line. Guess which country that map was printed in? And when Shelley scratched off China and Taiwan, they were the same color. Sorry, Shelley, you only get credit for visiting one country now. Even digital maps of China are affected. While Google Maps looks like this, Chinese-owned Baidu Maps looks like this. It has China's version of the border with India, the 9-dash line, and Taiwan is labeled like a province of China, not a separate country. And artwork has been affected too. Last year, Chinese students protested at the London School of Economics because a giant upside-down globe sculpture showed Taiwan as an independent country. As you can see from this photo, Taiwan is clearly pink while China is yellow. After an international controversy, the London School of Economics solved the problem in the most academic way possible. They added a footnote. And the map controversy has hit retail stores too. Last year, clothing company Gap was criticized by Chinese authorities for selling a t-shirt with the wrong map of China. This is what Gap's shirt looked like. And this is the map it was supposed to have. Gap wrote an apology so pathetic it's almost unreal. They said, Gap Inc. respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of China. We've learned a Gap brand t-shirt sold in some overseas markets mistakenly failed to reflect the correct map of China. We sincerely apologize for this unintentional error. Other companies that have recently apologized to China over maps include Versace, Christian Dior, Anon. And just last month, following that NBA Hong Kong debacle, sports broadcaster ESPN showed this graphic of China, complete with Taiwan and the 9-dash line. All this is to say that a huge number of companies that print their products in China, or simply have a business relationship with China, have felt pressure to make their world maps conform to China's official version. And that includes the maps they use in products sold in the rest of the world. And given that most maps are made by companies that are not educational companies, like Gap, ESPN, etc., those companies don't really care. Many of them are not even aware of the politics surrounding maps. And it's much easier to just do what the Chinese government requires than to take a stand against the world's most powerful authoritarian regime on what, for them, is a minor issue. The United States and other free countries don't have these kinds of map restrictions. So in the US, Canada, Europe, etc., you can show any map you want, like Shelley's scratch-off map, shipped to the US by a UK company that just happens to print its maps in China. See, it doesn't matter if it matches the US or UK's official world map. That's called freedom of the press. And the Chinese Communist Party is taking advantage of our freedom of the press. Their plan is to get the rest of the world to recognize their territorial claims. I'm not exaggerating. They literally say that in state-run media. So the Chinese Communist Party is slowly infiltrating all the maps everywhere by controlling the printing inside China and pressuring Western companies outside China. But this cloud has a silver lining. Not every company is a coward like Gap. Which brings us back to MOVA globes. The management at MOVA told us they hadn't even noticed the 9-dash line until we pointed it out to them. But now MOVA is aware, and MOVA has stopped production in China. I'd like to say it was our message to MOVA that convinced them to pull out, but it wasn't. It was something even crazier. See, this is MOVA's antique terrestrial map. It's based on an Italian world map from 1790. In 1790, China was ruled by the Qing dynasty, and the map of China looked very different. But guess what? China's communist authorities don't recognize that map because China was labeled in Italian. Chinese inspectors had approved all of MOVA globe designs since 2008, but things seemed to change in 2017, right as China was strengthening its map printing rules. That's when Chinese government inspectors entered the factory, the one MOVA had contracted to make the globes. The inspectors saw this antique design and told them they couldn't print it because it doesn't match China's guidelines. That's crazy. But it gets even crazier. The inspectors stopped the presses and issued steep fines for, quote, not being in compliance with China's rules and regulations. This applied to the antique designs plus a number of modern designs. All in all, MOVA was forced to pay more than $40,000 in fines. So what was MOVA to do in this kind of highly politicized environment? They closed up shop and moved all their manufacturing to Taiwan. Well, they didn't actually close up shop themselves. The Chinese government did. Officials boarded up the factory and forbid them from accessing it until they paid up. They had to pay because that factory still housed a lot of MOVA's expensive internal components, like solar cells and magnets. And it's those components that make MOVA globes spin magically like this, without any wires or external batteries. This unique technology is the core of their business. So the Chinese government essentially forced MOVA to pay more than $40,000 just to go into the factory and collect their own components. All in all, it was a very expensive form of censorship. As of 2020, MOVA does 100% of its printing and assembly at its own facility in Taiwan. And since Taiwan is a free country, MOVA can now print whatever they want with no restrictions. And now that the U.S. has a 30% tariff on certain imports from China, it's actually less expensive to manufacture in Taiwan. But like many companies, even after pulling out of mainland China, MOVA is still facing pressure. See, even though MOVA's map designs are now printed outside China, each globe uses highly specialized low-light solar cells and a low-friction motor. And there's only one country that manufactures those components. You guessed it, China. Which is why MOVA's willingness to even work with China Uncensored is so courageous. Very few companies have the guts to do it. And that's why I can proudly say that this episode is sponsored by MOVA Globes. For the record, we approached them about sponsorship. And get this, MOVA still had some of these 9-dash line designs in stock, the ones printed in China. I asked them to send me this one because it's a limited collector's item now. I mean, who else gets to own one of these awesome self-spinning globes that has the 9-dash line? And until supplies run out, you too can get one of these 9-dash line globes. This model is called Political Map Blue. A link with our tracking code is in the description below. And when you buy one of these MOVA globes, you'll not only have a cool story to tell your friends, you'll also be directly supporting China Uncensored. And trust me, we're not going to be sponsored by The Gap anytime soon. So click the link below and check out MOVA globes. And wherever you are in the world, if you see one of China's 9-dash line maps in a store, in a magazine, etc., let us know. Send us a photo on Facebook Messenger or to ChinaUncensored@gmail.com. Then we can all see how widespread this phenomenon is. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
When people describe particularly evil individuals or regimes, why is it that they use the terms Nazi or fascist, but almost never communist? Given the unparalleled amount of human suffering communists have caused, why is communist so much less a term of revulsion than Nazi? Communists killed 70 million people in China, more than 20 million people in the Soviet Union, not including about 5 million Ukrainians, and almost 1 out of every 3 Cambodians. And communists enslaved entire nations in Russia, Vietnam, China, Eastern Europe, North Korea, Cuba, and much of Central Asia. They ruined the lives of well over 1 billion people. So why doesn't communism have the same terrible reputation as Nazism? Reason number 1, There is, simply put, widespread ignorance of the communist record. Whereas both right and left loathe Nazism and teach its evil history, the left, and I'm talking about the left, not traditional liberals, like Harry Truman or John F. Kennedy, has never loathed communism. And since the left dominates academia, almost no one teaches communism's evil history. Reason number 2, the Nazis carried out the Holocaust. Nothing matches the Holocaust for pure evil. The rounding up of virtually every Jewish man, woman, child, and baby on the European continent and sending them to die is unprecedented and unparalleled. The communists killed far more people than the Nazis, but never matched the Holocaust in the systemization of genocide. The uniqueness of the Holocaust and the enormous attention rightly paid to it have helped ensure that Nazism has a worse name than communism. Reason number 3. Communism is based on nice-sounding theories. Nazism isn't. It's based on heinous-sounding theories. Intellectuals in general, including, of course, the intellectuals who write history, are seduced by words, so much so that they deem actions as less significant than words. For that reason, they haven't focused nearly as much attention on the horrific actions of communists as they have on the horrific actions of the Nazis. They dismiss the evils of communists as perversions of true communism, but they regard Nazi atrocities correctly as the logical and inevitable results of Nazism. Reason number 4. Germans have thoroughly exposed the evils of Nazism, have taken responsibility for them, and have attempted to atone for them. Russians have not done anything similar regarding Lenin's or Stalin's horrors. To the contrary, Lenin, the father of Soviet communism, is still widely venerated in Russia. And as regards Stalin, as University of London Russian historian Donald Rayfield puts it, quote, people still deny, by assertion or implication, Stalin's Holocaust, unquote. Even less so as China exposed the greatest mass murderer and enslaver of them all, Mao Zedong. Mao remains revered in China. Every Chinese currency note has his picture on it. Until Russia and China and Vietnam and Cuba and North Korea acknowledge the evils their countries committed under communism, communism's evils will remain less known than the evils of the German state under Hitler. Reason number 5. Communists murdered mostly their own people. The Nazis, on the other hand, killed very few fellow Germans. World opinion, that largely meaningless and amoral term, deems the murder of members of one's own group far less noteworthy than the murder of outsiders. That's why, for example, blacks killing millions of fellow blacks in Africa elicits almost no attention from world opinion. And reason number 6. In the view of the left, the last good war was World War II, the war against German Nazism and Japanese fascism. The left does not regard wars against communist regimes as good wars. For example, the American war against Vietnamese communism is regarded as immoral, and the war against Korean communism and its Chinese communist backers is simply ignored. Until the left and all the institutions influenced by the left acknowledge how evil communism has been, we will continue to live in a morally confused world. In the meantime, all good people owe it to the victims of communism to learn what happened to them. Even worse than being murdered or enslaved is a world that doesn't even know that you were. I'm Dennis Prager. To keep our videos free, click here.
Oh, you're doing. Tonight we gonna have some fun. I'm just feeling too fine. The way we used to when we were young. Just put on something sexy, so you be free to move around. Make all the children okay. We ain't reaching home till morning come. Why? Tonight the black man feeling the party. Yeah. Tonight the black man feeling the jam, 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 my darling. Tonight the black man just feels the boogie, boogie. Come on, hold on to your man. I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it, bing, 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 bang, bing, bang, bang, bang. Ring the bang, ring the bang, ring the bang, 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 bang. 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 Let me go, Rico. Remember when we were supposed before we had this mama. Every wave
This is WRMI Radio Miami International, Okeechobee, Florida, USA. Contact us at info@wrmi.net. Visit us on the web at www.wrmi.net.
Yeah, I'm going back home to my hometown, Okeechobee. Okeechobee on my mind, thinking about Okeechobee.
As verdades mais certas, mais impuras, que as nossas bocas têm para contar. Se sentes lá fora a chuva estremecida, como se sem laçar de uma aventura que pode ou não ficar por toda a vida, diz que sentes como eu, promete, jura. Se sentes este fogo que me queima, se sentes o meu corpo em tempestade, luta por mim, amor, arrisca, teima, abraça este desejo que me invade. Se sentes, meu amor, o que eu não disse, além de tudo mais que não disseste, é que não houve vez o que sentisse aquilo que eu te dei e tu deste. Se sentes lá fora a chuva estremecida, como te sem laçar de uma aventura que pode ou não ficar por toda a vida, diz que sentes como eu, promete, jura.
listening to Freedom Synergy Radio from WRMI, Okeechobee, Florida, USA. If you'd like a QSL card from Freedom Synergy Radio, just send us a reception report mentioning the day, time, and frequency you were listening to, which is 5,300 kilohertz. Send your report to radiomiami9@gmail.com. That's radiomiami9@gmail.com.
Soy Rudy Espinal en Santo Domingo, República Dominicana. Y esta es WRMI, Radio Miami Internacional, en Okeechobee, Florida, Estados Unidos de América. Envíenos sus comentarios e informes de recepción a info@wrmi.net o WRMI, apartado postal 526-6852, Miami, Florida 33152, Estados Unidos.
Soy Jaime Wagner en Hilversum, Holanda, y esta es...
Radio International, the external service of Czech Radio. News.
Russia has expelled 20 Czech diplomats in a tit-for-tat move. Czech Republic